And Curtin has launched its new campus in Colombo in Sri Lanka.
I think we're going to have to start renaming it, mate. It's Curtin Domination.
Curtin Domination.
Yeah. It's incredible. I mean,
I've just pulled up a photo. It's a very nice looking building, actually. It's very Curtin.
It is very Curtin, yeah. G'day, I'm Dirk Mulder, founder of the Koala News. I'm coming to you from Wadundee country, which is in Margaret River, Western Australia. It's a tough life over here, Rob.
G'day, I'm Rob Malicki. I'm the CEO of the Global Society, coming to you from Garrick Land. Mate, what takes you back to the other side of the country?
Every now and then, I do a bit of consulting in the background. So looking after a delegation from the Pacific Islands, so across the Pacific this week, who are attending the Australian Local Government Association Congress on Roads and Infrastructure. So it's been a fascinating week, learning new things about new sectors. So taking us away from international education, but gee whiz, obviously done a lot of delegations in international ed, and it's just wonderful to be able to interact with people from different cultures again and in a delegation setting. So it's brilliant. And I tell you what, here in Margaret River, there's not too many better locations to be able to go. We actually had dinner last night at Lewin Estate. So, mate, I think I drew the long straw on this one.
Very good, Nathan. You know what? Christmas is coming up, but strangely enough, for those of us in international education, it feels like we're far, far from the end. Another jam-packed kind of couple of weeks, lots of stuff going on. Where do you want to start, Dirk? Because there's still plenty to talk about, isn't there? Even though we're almost into that void space at the end of the year for international.
I know the limp to the end, but I think the next 3 weeks before the end of the year is going to be jam-packed. And if we take any lessons, I think, from the past, certainly the government hasn't been shy in releasing things on weekends or at 5 or 5:30 p.m. on a Friday. So if we take that kind of, notion or that sort of set of, that behaviour, for the want of a better word, I think we can expect quite a bit coming up. We are hearing rumours at the moment, and just for listeners, we're recording on Wednesday the 12th, Wednesday the 4th of December. So this will come out in a couple of days' time. But we're hearing rumours at the moment about changes to MD 107 that are currently being discussed / worked through at the moment with certain groups. We're going to see a lot more.
Maybe, Dirk, just for those people who have been dropping in and out of this conversation throughout the year, because, of course, a lot of discussion this year about the international student caps, but Ministerial Direction MD 107 preceded the international student cap discussion and already had a big impact. So maybe can you give us a really quick recap on what MD 107 was / is and kind of where we are right now?
Yeah, sure. So there were 2 ministerial directions earlier in the year, 106 and 107. 106 was a change from the genuine entry test or the genuine temporary entry test, GTE, into a genuine student test. So, and 106 is the one that a lot of people forget about, but I think 106 is just as important as 107. 107 is where the Minister for Immigration, Claire O'Neill, told visa processing posts to process visas in a certain order. And that certain order was around assessment level risk tracks. So if you're assessment level 1, you get processed in priority. Assessment level 2, you get processed after that. And then if you're assessment level 3, you could be waiting quite some time before those visas are assessed. Jason Clare has been on the record quite a bit in the lead up to the CAPS conversation around 107 being a mechanism to throttle the issuance of visas. So we aren't just talking about 107 as a risk mitigation tool, which is what it should be, because that's what the assessment levels do. But what it is actually a very clear a way for the government to be able to turn on and turn off visa processing as it requires. With the cap legislation not going through, the government now is scrambling, I think, to be able to, throttle's a really good word the minister uses, be able to sort of subdue those visa issuances and be able to reduce, the number of students that are coming into the country. Interestingly enough, Bridget McKenzie spoke here at the conference in Margaret River, and she made a very clear point around the pressure on infrastructure and the high levels of migration seen under the Labor government. So clearly, right across certainly the coalition cabinet as well as Labor, there is certainly still a large focus on migration and migration numbers.
I've been reading a number of articles throughout the week. There was one today in the Sydney Morning Herald about the impact of Ministerial Direction 107, so this throttling of visas, as you said. In particular, that article is about hospitality, the fact that hospitality businesses here over on the East Coast are just struggling to get people to work, skilled workers. And that's a direct result of lower student numbers. And in an article published in the Koala, Tracy Harris writing, and quoting Luke Sheaves, who is the CEO of Unis Australia. Luke's on the record saying that MD 107 has stripped an estimated $4 billion from the economy in our universities and putting thousands of jobs at risk. So we're definitely seeing that not just in the university sector, but across the broader economy already. And we've seen a very vivid example of that this week, haven't we?
Yeah, we sure have. I mean, IH Training Services Sydney, or colloquially known as International House. And I'll make the distinction that there are a couple of different businesses out there called or named International House. So this following discussion refers only to IH Sydney Training Services. But yeah, fit into voluntary administration, which is scary. I mean, they're a very large provider, particularly of English and, let's just say, a large provider of international education, with probably English being their main deliverable. But yeah, with a company like that going into voluntary administration and having to now look at, I guess, alternative finance measures to keep the business going, it's pretty crazy. I was very fortunate, and Tim Eckenfels, who's the CEO there and the driving force behind that, we had a good conversation with Tim, and he provided a statement, let's put it that way. And I might just read the statement because it speaks to, I think, the heart of the conversation and what we're talking about right now. He said, throughout 2024, IH Sydney Training Services has been in various discussions to bring an investor or acquire it into the company. Beginning in August, after the success of our mid-year junior holiday program, IH Sydney Training Services began to seriously be impacted by the effects of Ministerial Directive 107, the $1,600 visa fee, and the uncertainty of the pending ESOS legislation. Since then, we've been working to cut all unnecessary expenses and costs, reduce our campus footprint, let go of contractors, and have undertaken staff redundancies. We've been engaging in open, transparent communication with all of our creditors and have put payment plans in place where possible. On Friday, one of our creditors put us into voluntary administration. We continue our ongoing discussions with outside providers to acquire all or part of the business. We are in discussions with the TPS, Tuition Protection Scheme, and there is currently no impact to our students. Taking decisions before the end of the work week, I'm assuming that should be, as part of our path moving forward. So, devastating news. They said that the sentiment across the sector seems to be that this is going to be the first of many. And I don't want to use the word go down because I don't think it's gone down as yet. Hopefully there's still light at the end of the tunnel. Ian Pratt, who runs Lexus Education, I got a quote from in this story, and it's clear that the entire sector is really behind Tim and behind IH Sydney Training Services, and really wishes Tim all the best over the next week or two, in financially securing backer and being able to come out of voluntary administration and continue operating as per normal.
Pretty tough environment, isn't it, to be then trying to find investments? I mean, one of the things investors like is being able to cover off risks, at least know what the risks are. But the problem is with such vast uncertainty, pretty hard to convince.
Exactly what it was. Yeah. I mean, you just come back into the same environment, right? Where in terms of visa issuance, if that's unpredictable, obviously English hasn't been placed into or put into that category of the other sectors in terms of the assessment level reductions. So there's risk in that. It's a volatile situation that they're coming back into. So, it's going to be difficult. I think if they can get the settings right over the short term, then, IHCB Training Services has a really strong future. But we need to get that right in the first instance.
Okay, Dirk, and the other thing that's happened is, of course, the fact that the international student caps legislation, the ESOS legislation, didn't pass Parliament has thrown a lot of the sector into a different kind of uncertainty, isn't it? And we've seen some changes coming off the back of that too.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. As I think I mentioned maybe in our last podcast, I've certainly written about it a number of times, and certainly online. One of the questions has been, obviously, ACU was targeted is the wrong word, probably put under the spotlight in the Senate hearings about being one institution that the Department of Education thought was getting very close to any cap allocations. The ACU back in September decided, I'm choosing my words very carefully because on paper, I'm not sure there's much of a paper trail, but I think if you stand back, you could probably join the dots and say that the Department of Education probably tapped ACU on the shoulder and said, you might be better off not recruiting any more students for 2025. But either way, ACU made a decision to close their 2025 recruitment process or round back in September. Now the cap legislation hasn't gone through. They reopened it in this last week. The question I guess I've had, and then the one that I've probably been mooting for a while, is that's a cost of what could be, well, it's definitely millions of dollars. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you're talking about shutting down recruitment for 2-3 months, millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions of dollars. So, where we go to from here and, what the next step for the government might be. I mean, they've announced that they've reopened. We understand that the government's now mooting sort of caps and changes in that space again. What mechanism they might try to roll out to do that, it's obviously not going to be a legislative one. It'll be something to do with the Ministerial Directive or something along those lines. I mean, this is just a mess, mate. If I was the Vice-Chancellor at the Australian Catholic University, I would be jumping up and down right now. I'd be livid. As with UNSW, who were in the similar sort of boat, they were probably a little bit more on the front foot in terms of reopening. I think they may have seen the tea leaves. But again, I mean, all of this is predicated on legislation that never passed, and decisions were made based on probably verbal advice that was given, possibly. I don't want to say it was, but possibly, and assumed. But now we're in a situation where there may be something else that comes in that will change them, will force a change in behaviour again. If you look at this through a business lens, you wouldn't, it just wouldn't happen in any other sector. It's incredible.
Australia open for business.
Effective content in international education is about consistency, quality, and clarity. It tells a story that connects in a format that works with your channels. Talk to the team at Insider, an award-winning creative agency focused on international education. Visit insiderstudios.com.au for more.
Another thing happens this week. The Australian Skills Quality Agency announced that they were not only cancelling the registrations of a number of colleges, but revoking the qualifications of thousands. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of students that have received qualifications from two private institutions, Lovium and Gills College. And I looked at this story and said, so what this says is that probably for years we've had, some, and once again, I don't know the backstory here, so I'm putting these in inverted commas, low quality providers essentially just handing out paper. What it looks like is, that we've had a couple of providers there that, on the surface seem to have been providing either a very poor level of education or simply handing out qualifications without substantiation. In fact, that's what the articles were saying. They were saying that essentially the students were completing assessment that wasn't being correctly assessed. Hence, like thousands and thousands of qualifications being cancelled. And the thing that absolutely shocked me is that ASQA gave the students 1 week in order to justify why their qualification should not be cancelled. And I just thought to myself, how is this possible that the major justification, one of the two major justifications for all of this chaos this year has been around quality, and yet, boom, like the approach to actually trying to tidy things up can be such a shambles as well.
Yeah, and look, the strange thing for me, if you go back, right, with the conversation about shonks and all the rest, we had the ghost college thing. Well, they weren't ghost colleges, they were dormant colleges. So, there's always been this kind of threading the eye of the needle on truth around this stuff, perception management. And I shouldn't say what I love about this, but one of the things that actually kind of inspires me about this is that the government can do this stuff when they want to. And what I don't understand is, why didn't they just get on with it 12 months ago? I mean, we've been talking about this for a while. If there are shonks out there, get rid of them. Boot them out. And the reason you want to boot them out is you lift the perception of Australian higher education. If you know they are not doing the right thing, get rid of them. But they've been letting them, trade for so long. Now suddenly we're starting to see some action. Not only are you getting rid of them, but you're taking places out of the system. So when we talk about, if we want to have a conversation about, 270,000 is a cap level and it gets divided up across sectors, et cetera, and it comes, there's a certain vet number around that. How about before we start doing that, we actually look at who are non-performing colleges, because clearly the government has the data on that. Get rid of them, and then we can actually have a conversation about how many places are left in the system. And that's the bit that I don't get. It boggles me that we are continuing on, or the government is allowing potentially disingenuous colleges to continue to operate, but yet is quite happy to throw the dart at the dartboard and talk about shonks and all the rest. Let's just get on with it. Let's get on with it. If we know who they are, get rid of them.
Yeah. And once again, if this whole entire process had been handled appropriately through a normal consultation process and the like, we wouldn't have ended up in this basket case situation to begin with. I think we would have found reasonable solutions. Some things could have been actioned quickly. Everybody would have been given time to adapt, and the game would have gone on. And it would have been good probably in the long run for the industry instead of damaging our international reputation. And maybe by way of a little segue into some of the more positive news, having talked about a couple of organisations that ostensibly have been handing out qualifications without a proper assessment, a great piece from Alan Olsen in the Koala this week around international student performance. Always awesome. We say this every time that Alan pops up with a new piece of analysis.
Alan's been publishing his data for quite some time. I think it goes back to 2001, if I'm correct. Yeah, so in around 2008, 2009, from 2001 to 2008-9, domestic students always fared better at how much of what they attempted did they pass. They've always fared better at that. Around that 2008-2009 period, international students actually took over. And so since then, what's that, 14, 15 years worth of data, international students have been better. This last year, 2023, that's actually reversed. So it's gone back to domestic students being better at what they attempted, they passed. To the point where there's a differentiation of around, I'm just trying to do another
2 percentage points, yeah.
2 percentage points, yeah. So it's really interesting, Rob. I think we'll see how things go. And clearly, recruitment over the last little bit, again, one of these things. Potentially, what we're seeing is, a residue from COVID where the government allowed people to work full time, and we're now seeing some fail rates come in for international students because their priorities have been around work through that year as opposed to studying. So I think this is one to watch for next year. I suspect that this trend will reverse again next year, given that 44-hour-a-week work cap came back in, and we'll see how we go. But interesting for the first time in quite some time that's turned around.
In over 15 years. And Alan notes in the paper that 2023 was a boom year for international education, the sector really rebounding back out of COVID, that classic V-shaped recovery. And so it'd be interesting to sort of know more under the surface of what kind of drove that. And, was it a factor that simply there were more students in the system and therefore the ability of support services to keep up and the like played a factor? Generative AI, right? Interesting. Was there a temptation of all sorts? I mean, all students are using generative AI. Let's not pretend that it's limited to international students, but did that play some sort of background role in some way? Who knows? It'd be interesting to see one of those great researchers out there get their nose deep into the data and try and come up with some really solid, unpack it a bit more.
Yeah, trying to unpack it a little bit more. Like I said, I generally think, Alan makes the point that 2023 was a boom year for international students. So, there's certainly more students within the system. How many? I guess the question really becomes of how many of those. I hate using the word genuine because if you use genuine, the only alternative is non-genuine. I guess what I'm trying to say is how many of those, booming international student cohorts may have just lost focus on study and probably focused a little bit more on extracurricular activities. So we'll see it pans out in 2024, but I suspect it'll bounce back next year. That would be my guess.
Now I think about it, saying that was a segue into positive news was perhaps a funny lead-in, wasn't it?
It kind of was.
All I can say is that it's late in the year. My brain seems to be winding down already.
It sure is. Mate, you and me both. You and me both. One story that I really loved was a story written by 4 people, not just one, but 4 during the week on the Koala. And it came in from Lee Tran, who's obviously an accomplished international education researcher from Deakin University. But she's joined forces with a number of other people, including Daniel Hartridge, Diep Nyang and Gary Lee. And they wrote a story around student voices and the need for student voices to be heard. And I just, if we want to, I guess, talk about positive news, maybe not so much positive, but if we want to go say, where does our attention need to be right now? This is it, right? Like Tracy Harris spoke about it when we did a webinar a while back. We need to put our arms around the international students that are here right now and make sure that they feel they're appreciated, loved and welcomed. And I just really fear that over the next few weeks, and particularly as we lead into the election, that rhetoric around migration is just going to turn up. So this is a really good reminder and precursor to us all that this cohort exists and we really need to look after them. If we don't, the residue from that one is going to be a difficult one to come back to. So really, really important stuff.
Yeah, it's just kind of sad, isn't it, when you can see this election looming up in a few months and you know what's going to happen. It's going to be a dog whistle competition around migration. We're tougher than the other mob saying they're tougher than us. It's always going to be just going around and around. And it's just this negativity and division that we've seen elsewhere in the world and that to a large extent Australia's managed to stay clear of, I feel. And yet you can see that we're going to have all that's get blasted across the media for weeks at a time. It's just quite a pity.
Yep, I couldn't agree more.
When you can see it coming towards you and there's nothing you can do about it.
Mate, I couldn't agree more. If I can kind of, I guess, just go down a tangent. I mean, one of the really good things about this week and looking after the delegation from the Pacific is just how well they've been received by all the, if I can say, the local domestic Australian attendees at the Australian Local Government Association conference. Like, everyone has been really interested and have gone up, welcomed them. It's been amazing to see. So there's still a lot, like Australia is still a welcoming country and there are so many good people out there. But we don't see it when our politicians are dog whistle.
Well, as all of this uncertainty sort of continues to bubble around here in Australia, we're definitely still seeing that international education hasn't stopped. In fact, it's still moving forward full speed. And Curtin has launched its new campus in Colombo in Sri Lanka.
I think we're going to have to start renaming it, mate. It's Curtin Domination.
Curtin Domination.
Yeah. It's incredible. I mean,
I've just pulled up a photo. It's a very nice looking building, actually. Very Curtin.
It is very Curtin. Yeah. No, mate, it's wonderful. Look, it is wonderful to see. I worked back at Curtin back in the day, and I remember very, very clearly coming up, when I say coming up, being a party to, I guess, an Indian Rim strategy. And, to give Curtin its dues, I left there a long time ago, but they've really followed through on that. And you can see now, according to the press release that was put out by Curtin, they are equal number one university with the most, I guess, campuses offshore at 5 in the world. And all of those 5 are in the Indian Rim. So it's fantastic to see that they've really followed through and they've really engaged and bedded it down. So kudos to Curtin.
Awesome to see. And we know there's been a lot of movement in that transnational space over the last 12 months. Deakin, Wollongong, obviously announcing new campuses around the place. Who else? Who have I forgotten now? A couple of other big ones this year.
Western Sydney went into Indonesia. There's, I think the IRU were sniffing around in India as well, doing a multi-university site in Bangalore, or they're looking at something along those lines. So yeah, there's definitely lots going on.
Yeah, awesome to see, isn't it? Just continuing that good news story.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very, very good. Well, I think that kind of wraps us up, Dirk. And what do you reckon, mate? Is this our last news episode for the year?
Yeah, it could well be. What are we at now? The 4th? I mean, we might sneak one more in. Let's see what happens with the changes in 107, and we might be able to sneak another one in and talk, sort of break those down.
You know what we do need to do, Dirk? And for those long-term listeners who've been with us throughout the year, we have been occasionally stuffing things up and saying to our video editor, Len, put that one aside for the outtake reel.
The outtake.
It's really the only feature outtake reel.
I
think that will be coming. So it's possible, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening along, that the next episode of the news that you see might contain a few laugh moments that we've had throughout the year.
I think when you say, that we may have messed up occasionally, I think you're being very gracious there. I think there's quite a few outtakes to be had.
So it's going to be a good lot of fun to see out the year.
Yep.
I mean, the other thing that we could potentially do is just do like a general year in review sort of thing. But I mean, I feel like the big story is almost still unfolding as we go. So it's a bit hard to wrap up the year when we feel like we're still in the middle of it.
Agreed.
Good. Well, my friend, have a fantastic time out west, looking after our international guests.
Yep.
Amazing as always. And thank you for keeping us up to date, as you always do, with the team at the Koala News. And those of you listening along, of course, thekoalanews.com for all your Australian international, not just Australian international ed news, just international ed news, full stop. We couldn't do it without you, mate. It's been an amazing year watching your growth journey, and long may it continue into 2025.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Until next time, see you later.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
The Global Horizons podcast is brought to you by the Global Society, Australia's learning abroad support company. For about 10 years, the Global Society has been supporting Australian learning abroad teams with technology, training, consulting, strategy, marketing, you name it. We all know that learning abroad is time-consuming and complex, so if your team could use a little bit of extra support, reach out to the Global Society, globalsociety.com.
Today's episode was recorded on Garigal land in Sydney, and we pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Thank you. See you next time.